My name is Geoffery Igharo. I'm a writer and a branding advisor at Creuna. And here to talk about corporate communications in the digital age and the shift towards shared meaning that's going on. I will touch on some of the subjects that Arne has begun to discuss, going into a little more depth in a corporate context. So the short of the story is really that there's a strategic role for corporate communications today. We know about the digital revolution that has gone on. There's also an evolution in the context in which people operate and their attitude. This leads us to a situation where building shared meaning is really our objective as corporate communicators. And if we do those things well, then there are a lot of things that we can get out of it. So that's what effective communication is about today in the digital age. To begin with, the strategic role. Corporate communications is essentially about creating permission for your organization. If you think about any organization, you start off with a vision, something that you're reaching towards. You have values, a mission, which basically says where you are standing today and what you're trying to do. And there's a strategy that's aimed at getting you there. So your brand is essentially about selling this to people, convincing them. And corporate communications is supposed to help you do that. So if we do things right, really what it is about is not broad speaking, it's speaking to a specific set of stakeholders. And every organization has its own set of stakeholders that are different. Some may be government, some may be public employees. You have different sets of stakeholders and different priorities within those. But the point is, really, you have to create 360-degree communication to all those stakeholders. The digital revolution. Arne has spent some time talking about digital revolution, the change in users' power over their media, their tools, their time. The point I would make is that this is actually not just about individuals or consumers. This has to do with all stakeholders. So if you start to think about how employees relate to each other, how your strategic partners relate to each other, how governments and NGOs relate to each other, all these tools, all these media, this freedom of information applies to them as well. So in your role as a corporate communicator, what you have to do is think about the fact that all of these people have power in the same way that any individual has changed their position as a consumer. So what this does is, So that's the digital revolution. The second thing that's going on is there's this evolution happening in the context. So people essentially today are overloaded with information. They're more cynical and less likely to believe really you or anything you say. At the same time, they're looking for a broader shared meaning or some sort of value that you create beyond just what you do making money. So this is basically what you're trying to do, is you're trying to cope with corporate communications in an age where there are other things going on other than just the digital revolution. So if we talked about this already, a myriad of tools, media, information, and that really cascades to the point where we are, as people, bombarded with information. So today, I think the statistic is that every 48 hours, for example, more information is created and published than has ever gone on in basically between the beginning of time and 2007. If you look at social media, in Norway, the average social media user probably has 190, 200 friends. But sociologists would tell you that really you cannot connect and trust with more than basically 120, 250 people. So there's an overload of information, and that's a crucial thing to think about. Other thing to think about is that companies are basically struggling to communicate to people through traditional channels. So TV advertising, basically only 4% of people in Norway will actually trust you based on communication through this medium. They might get awareness, that's one thing, but if you're trying to build trust, it's not going to happen in this medium, for example. Another statistic, this is from the Edelman 2011 Trust Barometer. Basically, people don't trust corporations all that much. Typically, if you have a room of 100 people, there's probably 50 of them that don't trust a company. So that's a statistic, I think, from 2011, yes. In addition, if you think about how people relate to government and the media, they trust those people even less. So for example, if we've been trying to communicate to people through traditional media, and those people are trusted by 49% as opposed to 56%, you see the combination of the two things just really isn't particularly functional. Other thing to think about is that basically all your stakeholders are looking for something extra out of what you're doing. This is a statistic also from the Edelman Trust Barometer. The long and short of it is, in the European countries that they surveyed, between 70 to 90% of people believe that companies should have some other mission beyond making money, and even if it affects the bottom line. What's also interesting is that between 50 to 80% believe that if companies won't operate in line with societal interests, that they should be regulated and forced to. So this is the context of basically who you're communicating to and the attitudes that have changed with them. I think a good maybe exemplification of the change that's gone on is if we think about the Wikipedia leaks that have happened over the last few months. Essentially, the thing is that there's very little that people didn't suspect or think anyway. And Wikipedia essentially had a situation where they had trouble cutting through because people said, oh yeah, so yeah, we knew that. So that's the world you're living in, and as corporate communicators, that is a huge challenge you face. I present this picture, which was taken by Theo, basically a couple of days ago, I think, outside the NAV office. And this is some graffiti. Jeg søker et godt betalt og meningsfull hobby. So that's one stakeholder. You might consider that the person going to the NAV office is not your stakeholder, but really employees are crucial stakeholder. They're also consumers, and they operate within companies as well. So point is, there's a change. People want something additional, and they want meaning. There's a very famous web strategist and sociologist, Jeremiah Owen, and he said this recently: consumers often want the brands they buy from to stand for something because consumers themselves want to stand for something. So essentially what we are in a situation is we're trying to create shared meaning, and corporate communications has to help you fulfill that role. So if we go back to this model that Arne started to talk about, we have the company in the middle, we have an audience through which we actually have to filter through to get anywhere. The devices through which we actually execute our corporate communications then are efficiency, transparency, conversation, and desirability. If we execute the job of communicating well, we get through the filter in a way that works and is informed by the filter, which is your stakeholders. And ultimately, you get a shared message and meaning that filters out. So just some examples of this, focusing purely on a corporate context. Dell IdeaStorm. This has been around for about 3 years. And essentially what they have is a website where people come in and provide input into anything and everything that Dell does. If you stop and think about it for a second, what's really going on here is Dell could have said, we're a very innovative company, we're really listening to you, and put out lots of ads to do that. That's fine and well and good, but how effective would that be? On the other hand, if you get people to come in, bring their ideas, contribute to you, and implement them, then all of a sudden you have a whole different ballgame. So now you've got brand positioning, which is what you wanted to do, you've got customer service, and you've got product development, informed by your stakeholders. So just one example of executing that in this different way. Another example, thinking about transparency, Patagonia, which is a US-based company that does outdoor goods. What they've done essentially is bring every product of theirs, and they're perfectly willing to tell you where it's produced, who produces it, and what happens. So essentially they've said, we cannot hide anything. If there's a child working in a factory, that's good, tell us if we don't know it. So there's no pretense that they're perfect, and rather they put everything on the table and try to get you to work with them. And so this is a different way of thinking in terms of corporate communications. They're not just telling you, we do things right, this is how we're doing things right, here it is. If you want to help, please do. Another example of the third principle, which is conversation. One of the important things is that if people are looking to connect with you, then essentially you've got to do it through your individuals. The corporate message, basically faceless through traditional channels, doesn't work. So you've got to start communicating individually through people. And this is an example from Logica, where you've got employee blogs, employees on Twitter, actually going out and becoming fronts for the company towards the people that trust them. The reason really why this is important is because if you look at this statistic, this is also from the Edelman Trust findings, who would you think is important to speak with from a company? Well, the CEO is important, and you can see between 2009 and 2011, the CEO has become almost twice as important as they were. But what's, for me, more interesting is that a technical expert within the company is almost 50% more credible than your CEO. So that means that for any corporation, you essentially have possibly hundreds of people who can do a lot more for you than your corporate communications department or your chief executive. So an important thing to think about. Essentially, that means that you go from a situation where you might be able to leverage one really good communicator who does well with, say, investors or analysts or perhaps government, to essentially a sea of people who can actually do the job of communicating for you. And that's a crucial thing to think about, particularly when we start to think about blogging. It really is more than just a question of CEO blogging. Another factor, which we talked about, the fourth factor, desirability, creating something that actually is attractive to people that they want to be associated with. This is an example from Intel, a recent campaign that they've been doing. It's called Idea Jam, and they position themselves as an enabler for creativity and inspiration. And so what they've done here is essentially drive relevancy and association. They never actually say much to you about Intel, but the point is to basically create a situation where there's something that is allied with their brand and that they're actually helping to support and promote. So desirability is also important. And all of these things together are important because essentially, this is a quote from the Chief Marketing Officer of Ford, James Farley. He says essentially, you can't say things to people, you have to get them to say to each other. And what's going on here is basically the old story, which is that people generally will transmit messages that they believe in. So if, again, we come back to the beginning message which we had, which was we're trying to create shared meaning, then we've got to basically create a situation where we're communicating with people. We take in their input, their ideas about what the message should be, and then it gets through. So together, if we do that, we basically create an effect which you might call critical mass or tipping point, and the story starts to get through. But the crucial thing about it, essentially, is that you have to put yourself in a context that is a story. People are not much influenced by being talked to, but there's an old human impulse, which is to basically understand and absorb meaning from stories. So the question is, what's the story you're placing yourself in, and how do you do that? And really, the digital revolution is more important in terms of the tools and the ways in which you do this storytelling. But at the end of the day, what you have to do is find yourself in a story that's relevant to your audience. And if we do that, then we're unleashing the full potential of communication in the digital age, which is what we're trying to do. So I think next Theo speaks on corporate blogging specifically, but I just want to set up the context for what's going on in corporate communications in general. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Sorry, one more thing, which is that basically I just wanted to sum up what's going on, which is that essentially today it's about being relevant, sometimes even in real time. A message that's a day late is old news. Talking through real people and getting the right voice. Thanks.